I go to a lot of weddings. It's part of the job. And I'm in the season of life where I'm nearing the end of that chapter where I'm doing a lot of my friends' weddings. I had the honor of performing the wedding ceremony late last year, for my best childhood friend, whose name I happen to share, whose graduate degree, coincidentally like mine, was in Sanskrit and Indian studies. We kind of did a lot of the same stuff. And over the years, I've been able to maintain this relationship, and so it was really a joy for me to be able to perform his wedding. He had his reception a few months afterward, and so a lot of friends and family could come in town. And at the wedding reception on Good Friday, we were gathered together, and in this group was about 20 of my friends from childhood, guys that I have known since we played t-ball together. Most of us having gone to elementary school together. We still got those old pictures of us with our jerseys on from the Texas Rangers when we played shortstop and catcher. And we went to high school, and a lot of us maintained relationships in college and into adulthood now. And I watched as our friend Tuan got up to give the best man speech. And after having been at hundreds of weddings, I've come to expect a caricature of what a best man speech looks like. Usually includes some kind of bravado about days gone by, secret discretions that if you come to the bar afterward, he'll tell you about with a groom. A lot of kind of really stereotypical male-identified kind of stuff. However, in this moment, I watched my friend stand up to give the speech, and we knew he was going to cry because that's what he does. But I had forgotten how different it was. I watched him raise a glass to our friend and talk about what it meant when his father died to have our friend there with him supporting him. He talked about how he learned how to manage his money from our friend, about what it meant to have known each other as children and grow into the pride of watching us build families, how proud he was of the adults that he saw in the room. He kept calling my friend old boy, but it worked. And he said, "I love you." And you could have heard a pin drop. What I realized was that here's this group of guys who I still, into my 30s, say "I love you" with. They're not family, but we say the words "I love you" when we get together. Which seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, like a rare and unexpected way of being together right now. Because I think that our current cultural context doesn't make it easy to form those kinds of bonds in adulthood. Speaking as a straight white male, I know it's particularly difficult for that kind of expression because of some of the cultural expectations around it. But I don't have to rehash to you almost this huge amount of research and data that tells us what you already know, that we are the loneliest group of adults to exist in the history of this nation. Robert Putnam's research, which was famous decades ago but still true, ever more true, showed that people in the 1950s could list a dozen people they felt comfortable sharing their innermost secrets with, their problems, men and women. It moved across socioeconomic boundaries and race and religion. People in the United States had friends. His data, which was true decades ago and even more so now, said that when they studied folks a decade ago, the average American had one person, one living human that they felt they could confide in. That included people who were married or partnered. One. If you read the work of people like Brené Brown on relationships, she points out the fact that in this current cultural context, we're the most in-debt, often physically unhealthy, anxious, and lonely cohort of American adults that has ever existed. There's a stunning amount of research coming out right now about boys and friendships, about how male friendships start to disintegrate after adolescence. There was this wonderful book written that showed interviews with adolescent males, 14, 15-year-old boys who wrote about their best friends. And in these interviews, they said, "I love my friends. He's so cool. Look what he can do. We say I love you when we're together." And they would interview those same boys at 18. And typically they would say, "I don't share my feelings with people. Why would I say I love you?" The research showed that the diminishing amount of feeling loved and belonging among the boys that they researched, and then the young men, correlated with their understanding of vulnerability. Their experience of explicit love went down, while their belief that vulnerability and authenticity was bad went up. At exactly the same time that suicide rates quadruple for boys over young women at that point in their lives. It's interesting to read these interviews of people saying, "I love him," to "mm-mm." And I know that experience in an embodied way. I know what happened as a young male when I talked about loving my friends out loud. All sorts of really bad gender association and homophobia and all that kind of stuff got thrown into the mix. So if that's what the research shows, particularly white, particularly straight, particularly male people start to believe that vulnerability and authenticity are bad and therefore it's okay to step back from relationship, what happens to a culture that is disproportionately given privilege and power to people who are straight, white, and male? What message do you think we are internally receiving about what it takes to be in a position where you have a voice, where you have power, where you can make a difference? What do you have to give up? My guess is the message is you have to give up yourself. You have to give up a real, meaningful expression, an authentic expression of who you are. What a cost. One of the researchers wrote about this in the book I was reading, and she called it "Oppression Dressed Up as Awesomeness." I can do anything. Yeah, right. So I'm not surprised in this cultural context that someone like Brené Brown is so popular. Some of you are nodding your heads. A lot of people are following this woman's work right now. She's a woman who lives in Houston. She's a sociologist and a scholar in social work. Her work is about shame and vulnerability. And she has the most viewed TED Talk in history. Why are we flocking to information about shame and vulnerability? She has, in our culture, received all the marks of success. She's been on Oprah, she's been a New York Times bestseller, and she has a popular TED Talk. Her findings, after thousands of interviews, showed that people who believed, really believed that they had full, meaningful lives, that they identified that they were loved and belonged, had one thing in common. They all believed that they were worthy of love and belonging. And among the people who believed they were worthy of love and belonging, they all shared one trait. They all thought vulnerability was a good thing. They didn't say it was fun or comfortable, but they all thought it was worth it. In Brené Brown's research, she showed that it's not a two-way street, actually. That in order to break open the bonds that form meaningful human connection, you have to take the risk first. One of the key factors was that in this group of individuals, they were the people who said, "I love you" first, whether knowing if it would be coming back to them or not. They were the people who said that it was okay to hold the hand of their friend while they were waiting for bad test results or good test results. They were the people who invested in friendships first, not knowing how it would pan out. They were the people that cried at work and didn't care. For her, one of the most fundamental experiences of being alive only comes when you're willing to risk actually being seen. kind of like Anne Lamott talked about. Now, that piece that we read from Emerson this morning does sound like 19th century prose, but 170 years before Oprah and Brene Brown, he wrote that the two deciding factors of a meaningful friendship were authenticity and tenderness. He was onto something. He was onto something in a world where I'm sure the gender norms around male expression were even a little more strict than they are now. But he said that the two connecting dots were authenticity and tenderness. He has this long list of places. He said, do we ever actually show up as we are in the world? Either we're somebody's boss, or somebody's over us in a position of power, or we're trying to get something in a romantic relationship, or we're trying to sell something, but we're almost never actually being ourselves authentically in a moment. And that rare, beautiful moment when we let those masks drop, he said that's a holy thing. It's not just a relationship. He said it's religious. It's two souls colliding like atoms. That's the way he talked. Evidence suggests he might not have been very good at that. He was probably better at writing about being emotionally available than being emotionally available. However, I look at his context and I envy a little bit of it. When we take the youth and COA on a coming-of-age class on these trips, they learn about the fact that during the time in Concord, it was him and Thoreau and Margaret Fuller and Louisa May Alcott and Nathaniel Hawthorne all working together, all friends, changing the face of modern America to them at the time. And for him, he lifts it up to something that's religious. I did what I normally do when working on a sermon. I talked to my partner and friend, my wife Kate, about it, and she said, "Oh yeah, well that's because friendship's a sacrament." Oh, I should have talked to you sooner. She said it like, of course. She went, yeah, friendship is a sacrament. And that's not a word that we use in Unitarian Universalist contexts all that much. The ex-Catholics among us will recognize it. But the word sacrament just means a visible sign of an invisible grace. A visible sign of an invisible grace. And for me, friendship is exactly that if cultivated properly. What it does is make visible and known realities that we so often easily ignore. We were not evolved, created, made, changed, sprung up from the earth, or however you like to think about it, to have job titles or 401ks. But we do know that human beings are hardwired for love and connection. And that without it, at a young age, we literally can die. That we crave love and connection. We do know now from the Hubble telescope and scientists at NASA that atoms are mysteriously, wonderfully connected to each other across galaxies. The theory now is that atoms are entangled so much that if you manipulate one here, atoms may be moved and changed light years away. Every atom in the known world is mysteriously and wonderfully connected. Human beings are hardwired for love and belonging, and you are going to die no matter how much money you have. If friendship helps us make known that we are all cosmically equal, that we are deeply connected, and that we are as vulnerable as any creature has ever been, then to me it is a sacrament. Like Brene Brown talked about, in order to gain that fundamental experience of reality, to know what is real, that we are connected, that you are at home in this body, and that you cannot do it all, we have to take the risk. of being the first person to say I love you, or to cry at work and not care, or to extend a hand physically to someone who's trembling, to invest in relationships and not know what we're getting back. I'm not talking about the kind of creepy or overly needy, the next time I see a waiter, I'm going to tell him my deepest fears. But I do mean the recognition that this may be the only life you have. And that if you don't get to express the one self you have while you're alive, you may not get another chance. That if you don't cultivate meaningful relationships and exude an essence that says you are safe in my presence, other people may never be able to have a tangible expression of their truest self while they are still alive. That is a gift. It's one of my primary areas of spiritual work right now. This is my 5 to 10 year goal I'm working on most. Authenticity. Trying to show up and say yes when I mean yes, and no when I mean no, to be who I am in every moment. Easier said than done. And it scares the daylights out of me. But I have not yet had one moment where it wasn't worth it. It has always produced a net gain. If you take the risk of being the kind of person that says the words I love you out loud, of investing in human beings before you, it's one of the rare moments where I can stand up here with integrity and tell you that your life will change. You and the people around you will change. And you will know in your bones the experience that every single human being is worthy of love. And no one is alone. May it be so. Amen.